This is Theology Bits with Pastor Ben, Ministry of Central Lutheran Church, Eugene, Oregon. We are continuing with our series, A New Church, A New World. As we look at a new topic, we have been spending time talking about the Pacific Northwest as the none zone and trying to figure out what is going on with religiosity in the Pacific Northwest. And today, our sixth installment of this series, we're going to be talking about the assets and opportunities for the church. What is going on and what does this look like in our own religious spaces? So the first thing I want to say is that there is often in discourses like this a distinction made between insiders and outsiders, whereas there is those people out there, seemingly, who have these views about the none zone and have a philosophy that's so very different from the way we think inside the church. I would like us to begin destroying this distinction and instead to see the sensibilities of those outside the church and inside the church in this space we call the Pacific Northwest of 2023 are more alike than they are different. That might be shocking to some of you, but I'd like us to see what is going on, not just out there, but in here. What assets and opportunities are there, not just for evangelization of reaching people who aren't part of our church, but reaching ourselves who are part of our church. So I'd like us to dive deep and reviewing several of the things we've talked about, looking at the ways, how does this resonate? So the first thing we talked about in this series was secularization. On how and in what way the Pacific Northwest has become more secular. And in many cases we talked about it kind of hasn't, because it was never really all that religious to start with. But the piece of secularization was not that in this secular age that there are no religious people. That wasn't what we found. Instead, what we found was secularization looks like the conditions of belief. What does it take us to choose to be religious? And this is what secularization really was about. There are deeply religious people, but it is now a decision that people are making to be religious because socially there simply is not the kind of pressure for people to be religious on a regular day-to-day life. Instead, religion has become an individual choice. And that individual aspect is something else we talked about. That people are incredibly individual, especially with relationship to their spirituality. That I choose how I want to be religious. And while most of us in congregations would say you're really missing the community aspect, that's true. But one thing that we would not disagree with is that while we are not individualists, we also do look for deeply personal experiences. And that focus on experience is something that we all strive for. We all are looking for what is greater than ourselves in what there's no other word for it than simply the mystical. That there's something, a reality, that a relationship with Jesus is expressed in our own lives. And yes, it is deeply personal. That does not mean that it is alone, so we want to kind of cross out this individualism, but we want to embrace this space of the very personal and the very experiential. Of course we do, because after all, we are recognizing that we in the church, not just outside of them, are choosing our religious identities. We're choosing to participate or not participate. And so, of course, we are looking from our experiences. We are looking for meaning and purpose, and indeed our own identity. This is what we found sought after by many of these not religious any longer, and we're finding, well, maybe that looks more like us than it doesn't. Maybe something we ought to learn about this. And so here we see one of the things that resonates, I think, inside the church as well. Another big component we talked about was in this none zone, in this secularization, is there anything people are believing? And we called it reverential naturalism. This idea that in nature there is something of the mystical. There is something of a sense that there is something greater than ourselves. Very prominent in the Pacific Northwest. Very well could be prominent in other areas, but the research that we're looking at is about the Pacific Northwest. There's some kind of sense of a larger life in especially nature, but it is still naturalism, so we still have a very scientific understanding of the world around us. And so in that, there is great opportunity, but there is also great fear, especially in the Northwest, of if the naturalism comes from this world around us, then what happens if nature is being destroyed? Well, this aspect is many people would say, well, certainly not in our faith do we hold that. Well, we don't in the sense that we don't think about naturalism vaguely, but we certainly have a robust theology of creation. A robust theology that there is something greater than ourselves. And I think many of us who are very churched people find it in nature, find it outside, in the outdoors, in the mountains, in those different spaces we all live in. This is not so different. The different is how we focus this. And so this provides us an opportunity. Are we ready to provide that focus? I mentioned a theology of creation, which I'm going to be honest with you, Lutherans are not very good at preaching on. Because tied into a theology of creation is a robust theology of the incarnation of Jesus. If we were speaking to a group of Orthodox Christians, for example, this would be very present in their theology. Lutherans aren't as good at this. We have that theology, but we don't employ it very often. For example, in the incarnation, we usually think, well, yes, Jesus became a human, but are we really seeing the way Jesus became all humanity in himself? Are we seeing the implications? There actually has been a recent move in the Finnish school of Luther studies to say, this incarnational theology is there in Luther. We just weren't seeing it. And it focuses on the union with Christ. That how Christians are united with Christ in the incarnation and thereby united in a robust and concrete way with the world around us. This theology has not been deeply explored and used in our spaces. This suggests, this reverential naturalism, there is a great opportunity to come here and to proclaim who our God is where we live. The final thing I want to point out is the other major point is more and more skepticism of belief and more emphasis on right action. Are we ready to go live and work and act in the world rather than simply making clear what we believe? Where this was a major focus of this whole movement of authenticity was about how do you live? This is a real opportunity for us to say, how do we impact the world around us? And one thing that is going out of style, out of fashion, is getting together in committee in order to find consensus. Instead, the view has been, I'm not interested in having a bunch of meetings where we all get together and try to figure out how we all ought to be acting in the future. Instead, there is far more interested in building enough common ground in order to act. Common ground is very different from consensus. Common ground is saying, we agree enough on this action so we can act together. It is not saying we're all going to agree on everything. That model is slowly deteriorating and less exciting. It doesn't build energy. Well, what does that say? Remember that the goal was looking for deep meaning and purpose. Well, here, if the focus is on action, what's happening? People are ready to act. If we feel there's non-participation or less participation than there used to be, maybe the problem is what we were asking people to participate in. They're ready to act, but only if those actions are helping us in our meaning, our purpose, and identity. And this is where we see action leading to purpose. The days where people were happy to come and do a bunch of chores at church that don't really have to do with one central mission or purpose is really behind us. But the days when people are ready to do something that really matters, where they see real impact, there is a real opportunity here. And that because it's focused on action and not propositional theology, ready for trial and error. People are ready to be very forgiving for things that don't work, because after all, we're not asking that people challenge their own belief system. We're asking, what are we going to do? And what we're going to do is going to always look differently and act differently. It's going to be contextual. And there we have this opportunity to express our faith, because our faith comes in our deep meaning, purpose, and identity. This has all been to say, I don't know how different this is from those outsiders compared to these insiders. I think a lot of the things we're talking about resonate with a lot of people. And so that there's new opportunities for us in this new church, in this new world, to be a resurrection people, to be living in new ways. On Tuesday, we're going to be continuing this conversation, thinking differently about what new opportunities and assets are here with this cultural sensibility that was around us and already within us. This has been Theology Bits. I'm Pastor Ben.